Welcome to the American Academy of Grief Counseling Videogram on grief and loss of identity. And as the title picture shows, sometimes through the grieving process, finding oneself again can be a true maze, and it can be very hard to come out of if the process is even more difficult through various complications and so forth. But what we have to realize is with all loss comes change. Loss equates to change. So with that change, we sometimes find ourselves changing through the grieving process. And that's natural. That's not something to be feared. It's something that's intimidating, though, for many because of that. And it can be a very painful process. So whether it's bad or good, this type of change is going to create stress and some types of discomfort. But as living linear beings, we do change all the time. So it's important for us through a grieving process, especially to understand the changes that are going on and how we perceive ourselves during that change. The biggest problem is that perception, though, for many. Through the loss, the bereaved loses sometimes a sense of self, a sense of identity. And it's this perception that can be damaging if not properly managed itself. So what do we mean by a loss of self when we're speaking of identity? Well, if an individual loses a child, maybe the mother or the father feel that they are no longer parents. I was a father once, I lost my child, I'm no longer a father. And that loss of identity of fatherhood can be very painful when Father's Day arrives and the individual sees themselves maybe as no longer a father. What is my purpose? Individual who maybe had been retired is looking for purpose. So there's a loss of self. The reality is the individual is always a parent. You never were not a parent because of the loss. You still are. But individuals have a hard time doing that. Loss of ability is another example. And as you age, certain abilities are lost. And losing these abilities are sometimes very painful for individuals because they equate their abilities with their own identity. An athlete who was once in their prime is no longer an athlete. Or even at a greater scale, maybe someone who lost a physical ability. Maybe they become blind, or maybe they can no longer walk. And maybe they were a runner and they can't walk anymore. And that ability has been taken from them. And that was their identity of who they saw themselves as, their ability to do this or that. And they no longer have that ability. Also, through grief and that process, we sometimes emerge different. We might have different interests, and you can lose certain friends through that. Maybe as you go through grief and you come out of it, you're no longer interested in a particular scene, a particular hobby. And because of that, old friends are no longer sharing that common like or hobby, and you don't see them as much. And maybe they have an opinion that you've really changed since that grief. And because of that, they're not around as much. Maybe you've become more of an introvert instead of an extrovert, or vice versa. And this change is going to affect how they perceive you. And that could result in a change of landscape for you in regards to your social settings and so forth. So with all change is the fear of moving forward, and life is about moving forward. We're linear. So when we look at ourselves in a linear timeline, in essence, we are who we are. Joe is Joe, Mary is Mary. But as we see throughout the life, in the womb, as an infant, as a teenager, as a young adult, changes occur. Not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, interests, various losses occur. So all of these things are accidental. So when an individual begins to go through changes, which can be stressful. They sometimes wonder, who am I? Or who am I not anymore? The reality is you are you. You will always be you. But through change, accidental qualities about you might change. You might no longer be like when you were in college, open to particular party scenes as you might have been. As you mature and you have different interests then, and you would rather be at home more, obviously. So there are a variety of changes, this in regards to maturity, but losses in particular are very powerful in how they change our identity and how we perceive life. Losing your parents, you're going to come out differently on how you think back to the past about future holidays and maybe how you move forward as now as a patriarch or a matriarch of the family. So as we age, as we experience loss, there are powerful events that occur that change us. And we have to understand our accidental new roles within that to really have a hold of what our identity is. If not, our identity could be swept away so easily. So it's important, Nehmeyer goes through this, about dealing with life, is your life as a book, previous chapters, current chapter, future chapters, and we have to tie them together. The book is all about you, but you are going to be different in various chapters. You are going to be affected in different ways as you move forward. And it's difficult as you go through transitional phases itself of aging, transitional phases of learning, or phases of losing. And these things are going to alter perceptions. But you cannot lose focus of your identity of who you are, not allow the loss to take that away from you. So it's about embracing it all. And that's very difficult to do, to embrace death, to embrace loss. It's going to occur. We're linear, we're temporal. These things are going to occur. They're as much as part of life as birth and death. Loss is an instrumental part of life in the fallen existence in which we are on planet Earth. So you're going to go through it. It's important to understand its role in your life and how loss and change affects your identity and how you perceive yourself. You're going to feel loss. There's going to be doubt. There's going to be pressure from others as you navigate through this storm of grief, and you're going to emerge differently, and that's fine. You just have to keep your identity of who you are, not allow grief or loss to totally leave you on a deserted island of despair, so to speak. So if you want to learn more, there's a great article on what's your grief, and it has change, identity, loss, and grief. Check that out if you have time. What's Your Grief is a great site. It has a lot of information in their blogs on the grieving process itself. We do offer a grief counseling certification. Below is the link to that. And there is also our phone number at 330-652-7776. And our email is info@aihcp.org. Again, the program's online, independent study, you know, at your own speed, your own pace, complete the 4 required courses, and then you can apply for that 4-year certification itself. In the meantime, if you're going through something, you're going through a loss, it is going to change you, but it's not going to steal your identity and who you are. You have to anchor your identity and understand that accidental changes are going to occur through loss. And those changes are something that we all have to deal with. It's part of life itself. I would like to thank you for listening and have a good day.